Welcome to episode 246 of the 6G podcast. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 6G, and we cover about six topics in 30 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Anshul Sag, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Mike Dano from Ookla. Mike, how's your weekend been so far?
Uh,
Starting the new week.
yeah, no, it was a good weekend. I celebrated Easter, so that was really good. Had a nice relaxing time. So I've got a rock climb that I've been working on, but I didn't get it this weekend. That was my goal for this weekend. Was not able to do it. So good and bad. How was yours?
Good, lots of driving. I took advantage of Easter to drive back home from the Bay Area where I attended a media tech analyst summit, and also spent Passover with family. So also a very busy weekend and slash week. Uh, I'm just happy to be home, and happy. I actually drove back to Sonoma to watch the Artemis 2 launch. So
Yeah,
I'd love to roll that into my first topic, which I'm sure you're excited to talk about too.
I know. I've been watching
Um,
your posts on social media about it too. I'm excited. I'm as excited as you are. I think we've both been watching it really carefully.
yes, and I've been waiting for the images to roll through. I'm very glad NASA still uses Flickr, so I can get the images at their absolute best quality. Um, and yeah, so speaking of the images, uh, how are we getting them? Well, it's a new laser link called O20, which is just short for Orion 2 optical link. And it's a smaller version of something that we had actually heard about in 2013, where they were able to do, like a gigabit link. But basically what it is they um, are limited by the receiver on the capsule. Um, and it's really interesting because um, they say it's the size about the size of a house cat, which is a very interesting scale that they chose. Um, but they're able to do about 260 megabits per second up. So they're uplinking at 260 megabits per second and downlinking at 20. So um, they're actually streaming at 4K from the capsule, which is very cool, being able to see that. But what's interesting is, um, they're able to, there's so much data that they're sharing constantly, um, whether it's video, images, sensor data, um, all kinds of things that, they have to be very careful with what they're sharing and when they share it. And that's why, we didn't get some of those really awesome images from the dark side of the moon until a few hours or like almost a day later, because there's a bunch of other stuff to upload that's more important, like how they're getting home, which, by the way, they're splashing down in San Diego at 5 o'clock. You know I'm going to be on the coast looking for them. So I'm going to take my kids with me and we're going to watch a spaceship land in the water.
Oh
Like
my God.
just
Fantastic.
just how do you beat that? I'm
I
I'm
mean, that
gonna
is,
turn my
yeah,
little daughter into a space nerd.
I love
Um,
it. What a time
but
to be
yeah,
alive.
so in addition to that, um, the one thing a lot of people didn't realize is they have iPhones with them up there in space. And while many of the pictures are being taken on Nikon Z9 and D5 professional cameras, which if I were still in the Nikon world, I would probably have. They are also using iPhones to take selfies. And what a lot of people didn't realize was some of these really cool pictures of them with the planet illuminating their faces in the selfie were literally the iPhone 17 center stage camera, which is an 18 megapixel camera that when it's in center stage mode takes a 7 megapixel image. And then when you need the bigger version, it gives you a full 18 megapixel sensor. What's cool about it, and I'm going to nerd out a little bit over this, it's a square sensor. So whenever you take a picture, you can hold it in portrait and get both landscape and portrait automatically without having to turn the phone because the sensor is perfectly square. So you get both anytime you want, regardless of how you hold the phone. And I think they have the exclusive on that technology. So I don't think anybody's going to be able to copy that for quite some time. But it's very cool, and it's cool because you can I was using Flickr to look through this stuff, and I don't remember who first figured it out, but someone was like, "Yeah, it's the selfie camera. Like this wasn't a high-end camera. This is a selfie, and it looks really good." And then if you actually look at some of the other selfies they've taken on the iPhones later on through the process, you'll notice that there's already some dead pixels in the images because the radiation is destroying the image sensor. Um, so even with the amount of protection that they have in the capsule, they're still being irradiated by cosmic rays. And yeah, that's all I want to say. I don't want to take too long.
I
I'd
mean,
love to hear
that's
your thoughts.
incredible. That's so interesting. Like, I don't know. It really has been such a joy to be able to live through this week and, watch all the adventures of the Artemis crew and really cheer them on. And, we wish them a happy and safe landing. And I just can't wait for that. Yeah, for them to splash down and to get all the stories out of that. But yeah, I think it's interesting too is, just apart from all the technological stuff, it's like, it's neat to see what brands get associated with stuff like this. Like I think you actually tweeted about it too, is what watches the crew are wearing. I think they've got a version of the Speedmaster, which is obviously the Omega
And they're
brand.
NASA issued.
And oh, there you go. Oh man, it's so cool.
That's
But
kind of cool.
it's so cool. It's neat to see.
Also,
Uh,
they arrived on fighter jets, which is awesome. Like,
that is awesome.
they didn't just come on a helicopter or plane. I mean, they're like training jets, but they arrived on jets because a lot of these guys are ex fighter pilots,
It's still
which is
cool.
also
Yeah,
so
so
cool.
cool. So cool. So cool. Everything about the Artemis project has been just wonderful to watch. And so, yeah, it's exciting to see that continue, into Artemis 3 and 4 throughout the next couple of years. But yeah, it's neat to see, the Omega watches, the iPhone brand that they're using. And you've got a phone there that you're
My
showing that's
screensaver,
your
my
screensaver is
screensaver
Artemis.
for my phone
It's
is
so
the
cool.
launch.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. So cool.
how do you not?
I know. It's just great. Yeah. So yeah, very excited for them to splash down and yeah, see what else happens to them. Well, so my first topic is not nearly as cool as Artemis, that's for sure, but it is relevant to our podcast in that it is a little bit more detail from the recent 3GPP meeting that happened in Japan. So from space, we'll pivot into Japan, and so the 3GPP just finished a meeting there, and those big 3GPP meetings are really worth watching. They happen every couple months, but this was a pretty pivotal one in that they are making some concrete decisions about the 6G standard. And again, the 3GPP is the association that sets cellular standards. They're really the ones to watch in terms of what technical standards are going to be included in 6G. The 3GPP releases batches of new technologies every year or so, and they're currently discussing what should be included in the release of technologies that will be the official 6G specifications. And so, and we talked a little bit about it last time, but we got a little bit more information about the meeting that happened to Japan recently. And actually, I thought it was interesting. It's the post was written by Guy Daniels, who is one of the guys over at Telecom TV. He works with Ray LaMaestra, who I know quite well and is just a solid dude. And so it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see Guy Daniels covering it. It's interesting that he's writing about this on Substack. And what he wrote is actually quite interesting also. So a couple of the takeaways from his post that he wrote. First, he talked about the timeline. So it'll be 3GPP release 21. That'll be the initial 6G specifications. And the 3GPP has agreed to freeze work on this standard in March 2027. So almost exactly a year from now. And that's an important milestone because as soon as they stop work on the standard, it means they can't change it anymore. And it means that equipment vendors and handset makers and other companies can start making products that adhere to those standards. It doesn't mean that it's finished, but it means that the initial batch of standards are completed and that work can start on the hardware, and then they'll update it with software as time goes on. But that stage, they call it a stage one freeze. That stage one freeze is a really big sort of milestone in the development of the 6G standard and previous standards from the 3GPP. So that's the first one. A couple of other takeaways from this post that I thought were really interesting was that it sounds like based on this recent 3GPP meeting, it sounds like they have officially settled on the using 5G standalone, the SA 5G SA standalone architecture. They want to use that as the base for 6G, which is pretty interesting. It's not a surprise. 5G standalone is far more capable than the initial version of 5G, which is the non-standalone version of 5G, the NSA version of 5G. But the fact that they've officially sort of standardized on the standalone version of 5G as sort of the base for 6G is important, moves everything closer to sort of reality. And it also creates a little bit of motivation. I assume it creates a little bit of motivation for the 5G operators out there who have not yet begun upgrading from the NSA version to the SA version of 5G. I assume that this will give them another reason to upgrade their systems to the standalone version of 5G. And just a side note here is that my colleague Luke recently put out a report on standalone 5G, and you really do see some really impressive performance improvements when operators upgrade to the standalone version of 5G. Not a surprise. That's sort of the version of 5G that everybody's been watching for. And it's also not a surprise that it'll be the sort of baseline architecture for 6G, the underlying baseline architecture for it. But still, we're making progress. We're making progress towards 6G. And then final takeaway that I'll briefly mention from Guy Daniels' post is he talked a little bit about non-terrestrial networks, the satellite networks that are out there. His basic takeaway was that they're going to talk more about that. So not a surprise. Again, the idea of smartphones connecting to satellites is still a relatively new one. There are technologies out there that already do this. There's a number of standards that they're using now and will into the future. But it really is a sort of collision between two industries. It's the cellular industry and the satellite industry, and they're really in the process right now of a slow-moving collision. And this the work at the 3GPP is part of that. They're essentially integrating cellular standards with satellite standards as part of their work on 6G. And so it sounds like work will continue on that, and we'll probably get more details as time goes on. It certainly doesn't, it's not going to stop any of the work that has happened so far. It's not going to affect any of the commercial deployments that have happened so far. But it is an indication that satellite is increasingly important in discussions about 6G. I think that's the real takeaway, is that when you talk about 6G, you talk about a couple of things. And one of the things that you'll talk about in 6G will be satellites, which I think is great. And it goes back to our conversation about space, right? How are these satellites going to get up there? They're going to use big rockets, just like Artemis did. Probably not that size of rocket, but similar rockets. So interesting takeaways from Guy Daniels.
Yeah, they'll most likely use something like a Starship. But what I would say on this topic is I'm very glad that the conversations we've been having about 6G that have led up to this point have culminated in the agreement that SA was a mistake, NSA was a mistake, and that 6G will have to be SA only. And obviously there will be a 5G network. There will be tons of 5G in coexistence with 6G. But if you want to leverage 6G, you have to do SA, which is great, because my whole argument for the longest time was that carriers were lazy and cheap and did NSA and didn't really make the investment to go SA. And we were just talking, Turkey didn't even roll out 6G until last week.
5G. So 5G until last week.
5G till last week.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very frustrating because people are upset about what they've been promised with 5G and what they've gotten. So and people's immediate reaction is, well, why do I need 6G if 5G didn't deliver what I wanted? So I think NSA was the main reason why that happened, which is really unfortunate, because now 6G will theoretically deliver what 5G could have done, because it will force SA, right? So yeah, I'm very excited about this. Everything seems to be looking pretty good in terms of things we've been talking about for the last year or so about what might be in 6G. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that first freeze, as well as the culminating second and third freeze that kind of solidify things. And having that happen in 27 does set the opportunity for some pretty standard, potentially compliant deployments in 28 and 29. And if I remember the timeline, I was looking at the article you're talking about. That timeline looks like, everything will be pretty buttoned up and ready to go by March of 2029. So that does set us for a potential 2029 full commercial launch,
Yeah.
and easily a 2030. But I'm getting the sense that 2029 is when infrastructure vendors want things to happen, and maybe carriers are pushing for 2030. I think we might see maybe a T-Mobile push at 2029, but I think everybody else is more likely going to be a 2030 timeline if they can nail that. But yeah, I'm excited, and I appreciate you looking into the latest RAN meeting from 3GPP.
Yeah.
That does lead me to my next topic, which is AT&T launched a new plan called One Connect, and on the surface, it seems pretty cool because it's a one subscription, one flat monthly price, and you get both fiber and wireless, which is pretty good. You get a gig of fiber, and it's basically $90 a month for one person, which is pretty good because I pay $90 a month for my fiber right now. So I would basically be getting a line for free on my AT&T service. But it's 120 for two people and 225 for unlimited members up to 10 lines. So if you've got a big family, this is a deal. Because it comes out to like $22 a line and your fiber is basically free. But I think the big thing here is it's only for people who have access to AT&T fiber, which is a limited footprint on a national scale. It is growing, but it's still limited. Also, you have to bring your own eSIM compatible unlock smartphone. So this is not for somebody on a contract or someone who wants a subsidized contract. It's a BYO situation. There's also, it's not prioritized traffic for the wireless. So if there's any kind of congestion, you will get throttled. So this is kind of a, how do I put this? This is a cheapo plan. There's like a prepaid plan almost. And it does exclude satellite. So that's also interesting. But my colleague from another firm, Avi Ringart, did catch some of these terms and conditions. And it was really interesting because it was like, there's almost more terms and conditions than there are like actual like features to the plan. So I think it's really important to understand that like it's a family plan, but it's also a bundle. And it's interesting because it like really locks you in, right? Because it's so cheap. But I think the fact that it's bring your own device eSIM and that laptops aren't supported and it's not priority wireless data. But it is interesting, right? Because it leverages fiber. I would say it's a strength AT&T has. And I think their wireless business is doing okay now. Like it's not hurting like it was before. And this is like, it's kind of innovative, right? Like I could see Verizon doing this too, right now that they have a much bigger fiber footprint. It's like the return of bundling.
Yeah.
But, a little bit more creative.
Yeah, I definitely see it as, I mean, I would take the launch of this plan as AT&T and others now are beginning to react to the cable bundle. So I think what we saw last year through to the end of 2025 was that cable companies like Comcast and Charter were really working on, offering very competitive prices for their bundle of, fixed internet service and MVNO services. And so they were really offering some very competitive pricing plans, to the point where mobile was almost free. And so I would expect that this plan from AT&T, I would expect other plans to come out that are similar to this in terms of it's essentially the telco response to the cable threat, or to the cable pricing strategy.
I would also say I forgot about this because this happened this morning and I was half awake when I saw it. T-Mobile also launched a bundle plan, which I forgot to mention, which is $45 a month, which is half the price.
Yeah.
And it's called 5G Home Minternet because it's using Mint. And it's an unlimited wireless plan with 5G home internet for $45 a month with it, which is absurd. But again, it's not going to be very fast, right? Because it's FWA and it's Mint, so it's going to be a deprioritized mobile connection. But if you don't care about the price, or if you don't care about the speed, and you do care about the price, I gotta say, $45 a month for home internet and for your cellular line is pretty impressive.
It's a pretty good deal. And it really does. I think what it does is it reflects this is the new competitive landscape in the US telecom industry today. It's really industry where these competitive bundles of fixed services and mobile services, and what are the terms and conditions? How can they reduce the price of one in order to sell the other? I think that is the game that we're going to see this year. I think it really is a game of convergence, bundled services, lower prices in some cases, but there's still, like you said, it's the terms and conditions are really where this is how can they eke out a little bit of profit, by selling extra services to these customers. I think that's where you're really going to start to see in general, the U.S. telecom industry is moving to this new level of competition, which is it used to be free phones. It used to be, additional mobile services. It used to be, you get Netflix for free. And now the game has changed a little bit in that it's a bundled service offering. You get fixed and mobile together. I think that's where things are headed right now.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. Yeah, fun stuff. So I've got another topic. I'm gonna pivot to my second one, which is a very different topic than what we've been talking about. And frankly, I think it's a lot more complicated topic, but I think it's worth bringing up here. It's about the sort of the future of the wireless network, what it's going to look like. And I bring it up because I've really been thinking about what, as operators upgrade their networks, their mobile networks, what are we going to see? What is it going to look like? What are they going to do in order to remain competitive? And a big topic that they've been talking about, as you and I have discussed in the past, is this idea of installing GPUs inside the network, inside base stations, in order to conduct AI inferencing business. This is a big part of the AI RAN story that a lot of companies have been talking about in relation to 6G. And, we keep getting additional insights into what this battle is really about. I remain unconvinced as to the value of putting GPUs inside of base stations on a widespread basis. I think that it may make sense in certain circumstances. Certainly T-Mobile and SoftBank have been very vocal about that. But the reason I bring it up today is because we got a little bit more sort of commentary on this topic. And so I'm going to mention two very telling quotes about this that I think casts a little bit of cold water on the idea of putting a set of GPUs inside of a base station in order to run AI inferencing, in order to sell inferencing as a service, and for operators to make more money that way. The first quote comes from Yigal Elbaz at AT&T. I think I'm sure you've talked to him in the past. He's a real outspoken guy, has a real smart guy. I mean, he really has a real good outlook on the industry, and he speaks in a way that I think is understandable and sort of relevant. And so one of the quotes that he just gave is that he talked about the proliferation of computing across the nation in all metro areas. He said, "I'm not sure that there's much value in extending that compute all the way to the far edge to save another millisecond or 2 milliseconds of latency." And so he was kind of discussing that in the context of, whether it makes sense to install GPUs inside of AT&T's network in order to sell AI inferencing. And essentially it's just, he's having trouble seeing the value in that idea, and I think that's kind of interesting. I mean, obviously operators have very different approaches to strategy. Some operators go real heavy on 5G, some don't. So it does make sense to have a different view on this particular topic from AT&T compared to T-Mobile or others. But I think it is interesting. And then the last quote I've got here that I think is also kind of interesting and talks to this topic specifically is from I guess it's from the Wall Street Journal, but I'm reading it through Axios. But they talked about the recent, you talked about it, Nvidia's new products that Nvidia released at their big conference, the GTC conference,
Or the grid
and
stuff.
yeah, AI grid stuff. And the quote here though is just talking about it's from a guy named Paul Kadrowski, a venture investor.
I know
Anyway, he
him.
told it. Okay, yeah, I've never heard of him, but I thought this quote was interesting, in that he told Wall Street Journal that the inferencing stuff is incredibly important to Nvidia because it's all efficiency driven, and that basically his point is that Nvidia is, quote, desperately trying to find a way to extend the franchise into inference. And I thought that was interesting. Essentially, Nvidia has built their business on selling the chips that make AI training possible. And obviously, AI training is extremely compute intensive. You really need tons of GPUs in order to get the AI training working. But when you talk about AI inferencing, which is, after you train an AI model, then you use AI inferencing in order to deliver the results from that AI model, not necessarily as computing intensive. And so NVIDIA is in this position where they need to stay relevant as AI inferencing becomes more important. And so that's a big focus for NVIDIA now, which that just sort of ties into the idea of putting GPUs inside of the base station. Obviously, NVIDIA wants to expand their, market dominance and put their chips into more and more places. So they've been talking about, making their chips relevant to telecom operators, putting their chips inside of base stations. I think it remains to be seen whether big equipment vendors like Ericsson will and operators like AT&T will adopt that strategic effort by NVIDIA and others. Obviously, we've seen Nokia. Nokia has a huge investment from NVIDIA, so obviously Nokia is a proponent of this idea of putting GPUs inside of base stations. But I think it remains to be seen whether that will be adopted by other players in the industry, such as AT&T and Ericsson and people like that. So I think this is I think the real battlefield to watch as 6G standards are finalized. It's like how many 6G players are going to want to adopt NVIDIA silicon in their base stations. I think that is an open question, and it's one where basically billions of dollars hang in the balance as to whether they decide to chase AI inferencing and this new business model. I think it remains to be seen. But I know you have a slightly different take on that topic. I don't know. It's kind of a big one, a lot going on there. But I don't know. I'm collecting these these quotes to understand, and these different perspectives on this industry to kind of understand what's happening. So at least I can understand what the battle is. Don't know where to say
Totally.
it yet.
I do think NVIDIA is absolutely looking for places to use inference. I would say their architecture wasn't originally designed to be as efficient for inference as it was for training. But they've worked through a lot, and they've re-architected their GPUs with every generation to be better at inference. They have more competition in inference than they do in training. So I actually think there's more compute available to the industry for AI inference that's very efficient. So I think that's something to consider as well. It's not just an NVIDIA story to be told in inference. They're just the loudest voice for all AI, whether it's inference or training. And I think Paul Kudrowski is right in that sense. I will say Igal is, definitely one of the better voices in the industry. And I do believe a lot of what he has to say, but I also believe that AT&T is behind T-Mobile in terms of deploying standalone and 5G advanced and probably 6G as well. So uh, while I think AT&T is on the right path, I'm not sure that they're necessarily the leader in the space to be making leadership statements. Um, and I want to see them be a leader. I want competition. I want Verizon to also be more competitive. So, because like, right now T-Mobile is like the one carrier that's really talking about AI RAN, right? Out of the big three. And I think part of that is just because, you know, they've basically been running on standalone for way longer than their competitors have, whether you're talking about their 600 megahertz stuff or the 2.4 mid-band. So I think they're mentally in a different place, I think, than AT&T and Verizon are. And also their CapEx cycle is totally different too, right? Like they front end loaded so much more of their CapEx. Um, and I think that means that they're going to be doing a refresh, like they said earlier too. So I think the reality is going to be somewhere in the middle, right? It's not going to be zero, but it's also not going to be 100%. I believe it's going to be a mixture of stuff at the RAN and stuff, sitting somewhere in the near edge. But I don't think everybody's going to need it. And I think the CSPs are probably going to be the ones who actually drive it in terms of demand. I do think, T-Mobile showing that there are some ways to do AI in the core, like with the live translation feature, which is just one of many. But I also have a feeling there will be some applications that they want to deploy that will require like RAN-based compute for really low latency applications. And to Igal's point, he's right. There probably aren't any applications today that require that kind of low latency. But um, if we're gonna do stuff like, remote drone operation, you're gonna want as low latency as you can get, right? So um, then again, that might be fully autonomous, right? But again, what's going to be driving that? Maybe you need to run an agent in the RAN to control the drone efficiently and safely. So I think we're so far out in terms of actually figuring out what the topology is going to look like. But I think in my mind, I would be looking to the geos and the T-Mobiles of the world on how this is going to work, less so the ones that are fast followers or even people that are trailing. I wish AT&T wasn't behind, but they very clearly are. So um, I, I want to see what the leaders who are leading are doing, and maybe we'll see some, uh, competitive hopscotch, right? Where we maybe see someone leapfrogging another, which we saw with 5G, right? Like T-Mobile very clearly was a distant fourth or third, depending on how you measure it, and they now are number one. So, there are ways that things can change, and I'm optimistic because I love competition. I don't want to see T-Mobile be, the one and only leader in the space. I want them to be challenged more. But like I really thought Geo was actually going to be more aggressive with how they deployed 5G, and we were going to see more unique 5G use cases. And they did deploy some slices, but like it didn't really seem like it took. So yeah, I'm really curious to see how this pans out. But I think your skepticism is fully warranted. I just think that we'll probably land somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see who makes what decision and when. I mean, now is the time when they're really charting out, where they're going to invest, how they're going to do it, and I think it'll be interesting to see how different companies arrive at different decisions. Given the same inputs, they all essentially have the same view of the market, but I expect that they're like just like in 5G, they're going to make very different decisions about how to go forward.
Definitely. And like it reminds me of the whole Verizon edge compute story, right? Like they deployed all these edge compute nodes all over the country and nothing happened.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a penalty to moving too early, uh,
Yep,
but there is a lot of rewards if you move at the right time, and I think that's the question. I assume eventually, yeah, AI inferencing will be everywhere, and deploying it at the very far edge would make sense. But is that a 2040 situation, or is it a 2030 situation, or is it a 2028 opportunity? Really hard to know at this point.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll move on to my final topic, and we're back to talking space and SpaceX specifically, which is now the parent company of xAI, and a joint venture with Tesla on TerraFab. This TerraFab announcement happened a few weeks ago, and I had some press reach out to me about it, and I was brutally honest that I don't think it's going to happen in the way it was presented, which was Tesla's going to build a fab with SpaceX to make 1 terawatt of capacity available to those companies for compute. And guess what? Today they announced that they're partnering with Intel, and that makes way more sense. So Intel's CEO was pictured and did announcements with Elon on the TerraFab, which will make processors for Tesla and for SpaceX, and that will mostly be for these data centers that they're building for AI, but also for all the chips that SpaceX needs for its rockets, for Tesla and all of its cars and all of its robots. But I will say that this is not a near-term story. They haven't purchased any land, as far as I know. They haven't built any facilities. They haven't ordered any tools. Tools alone, best case scenario, 18 months, probably more like 24. So minimum, if they had even placed any orders, would be 2 years from now. Realistically, I think we're looking 3 to 4 years from now. So that makes sense why Tesla inked a deal with Samsung late last year to basically continue its supply chain for automotive using the latest possible nodes. And it'll be interesting to see what'll happen in terms of like how these fabs what these fabs will look like. So they say it's 2 chip factories. So I have a feeling what will most likely happen is that one will be a logic factory, which is chips for and processors, and the other will be like a memory factory, which will be probably a Samsung enabled application because they're already partnered with Samsung today in Texas. So like the way I look at it is Tesla's not doing any of this on their own to begin with, and chip design is much easier than chip fabrication, especially if you don't have the know-how. There are effectively like 5 companies in the world that are producing nearly 100% of the chips on Earth. If you take TSMC, Samsung, and Intel, you've already got like a good 70-80% of the market. Then you add SK Hynix and Micron, you've got like basically 100%. So it's just there's not that many companies doing it. It costs tens of billions of dollars. I think the quote was 25 billion, Elon said. That's pretty realistic, I think, if we're talking 2 fabs, but that's with help. If they did this on their own, that was a low number. Like it probably would have cost them double.
And they're going to build the manufacturing facility that will make the chips, right? That's what they're going to do. And
Yes.
are they going to do it in Texas or somewhere in the
Yes,
US?
Austin.
Austin.
In the cluster of factories that they've built, my former colleague Will lives out in Bastrop, and that's where their center of orbit is. So I believe they'll probably be doing this out in Bastrop because they own the land already. And I mean, realistically, like they do with with electric vehicles, the battery fabs are near the vehicle fab. I expect these chip fabs will probably be close to the data center and also the car manufacturing facilities because then you can make very quick turns. And if you look at like how the Chinese have been able to build these cars so cheaply and so effectively, it's because the supply chain's right there. So when they need to troubleshoot things and make adjustments and change things quickly, everything the entire ecosystem is near them and around them, and that's really how they're able to make things happen fast. So I understand the need and desire. Also, it gives them more control of the supply chain, costs. They can custom build things as they see fit. But I have a strong feeling that this is going to be massively accretive to Intel for their foundry business. They're going to be able to, claim quite a bit in terms of revenue and profit, but I also don't think this is going to be a near-term story for them. But it does look good for their stock. Last I checked, it was up like a good 5%. That's 4% now. But in the last like week, their stock is up 26%. So the good news is rolling for Intel. And this is also means that, an American company will be producing chips or helping to produce chips for another American company, which is very much part of what, the Trump administration wants. And truthfully, I think every administration has wanted for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, what I think is interesting, here's another example of the expansion of Elon Inc. You know, Elon Incorporated. Now he's going to be building chips too for all of his various businesses. I know he's talked about how important it is to have control over the supply of chips for everything from Tesla to SpaceX to XAI. So I would not say it's a surprise. I think it's very interesting. I think I will assume it will accelerate, the work that Elon Incorporated is doing. Will this bring us a million data centers in space? I know that's part of the SpaceX IPO. That's the plan, is to launch data centers into space and have them run AI out in space because it's better and cheaper there. I don't know. We'll see, but presumably this is part of the plan.
I am not a believer in the space data center thing. I do think there will be some space data centers, but not at the scale that Elon's trying to propose.
A million seems like a lot. Yeah.
And the truth is that like I actually, when SpaceX, long time ago, when SpaceX first started launching reusable rockets, I was like, I'm going to invest in the SpaceX IPO when it happens. But now there's like XAI, which is losing tons of money, and Twitter, which is also losing money or not as profitable as it should be. Like, I don't want to touch that stock now. Like, I don't want anything to do with it. Like, I was such a big fan of that. I'm like, I still believe space is the future. Like, you want to invest in these space companies before they become trillion-dollar companies. And by the way, the IPO might be the first trillion-dollar IPO. So we'll see what happens. I don't want to touch it because, like, let's remember how many of these satellite constellations have gone bankrupt, right? Like, we had some discussions online with some people on Twitter recently, like yesterday or today. It's going to cost them billions of dollars to maintain these thousands of satellites as they, blow up. They've had two blow up recently. As they decommission within the 5-year span, like having to launch more of them. It costs $1 million for the satellite and $1 million to launch it. It's $2 million a satellite. Like, that's an expensive endeavor. So you've got to have that momentum constantly going, and that's a very high risk, especially when you add a fab, which was a conversation point that I had. One of Intel's biggest costs is just depreciation of the foundries, and that's why there's so many, fabless semiconductor companies, because nobody wants to eat that depreciation. So it's, depreciation is a blessing and a curse when you look at it on accounting, right? Because it's a write-off, but it's also like a bleed on your financial viability. So I think this is good for Tesla. Maybe they'll take on the financial risk. I don't know. Those details were not disclosed. And I don't know if we'll know those details for quite some time. But maybe we'll get some news from Intel on earnings and see that. I feel like they wanted to wait till earnings, but they couldn't for some reason. Maybe it was going to leak. But yeah, I think this is great for everybody. I can't really see a downside.
No, it does make a lot of sense, right? Those two companies partnering to do the manufacture. Yeah. Yeah. And so it does dovetail in a little bit with my last topic, which is really about direct to device satellite stuff. I mean, it is within the realm of satellite operations a little bit. So the news item that came out about a week ago was that, and this is again, it's a little bit related to the topic of satellites. So there's a company called Grain Management. It's an investment company, and they, about a year ago, they agreed to purchase some 800 megahertz spectrum from T-Mobile. Not a huge surprise. Grain has previously sort of dabbled in spectrum ownership. They're one of several investment companies that has done so in owning spectrum in the U.S. but anyway, they have already agreed to buy this 800 megahertz from T-Mobile. The new thing is that Grain mentioned in one of their FCC filings that they might be interested in leasing that spectrum to direct-to-device companies like potentially Starlink. They didn't mention Starlink in the filing, but they said they may lease their 800 megahertz spectrum to D2D companies. And they didn't name any of them, but there's only a few of them out there. But I think what it reflects is that this D2D market is hot right now. I mean, this is where a lot of the activity is happening. We see Starlink, SpaceX launching Starlink, getting into the D2D market, direct to device, where a phone connects directly to a satellite. We've seen a lot of interest in AST Space Mobile. Same thing. They sell D2D connections. Tons of interest in that company. Link is another one. They merged with a company called Omnispace with backing from satellite operator SES. They also were chasing this D2D market. So I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise that a lot of these companies are, sort of clamoring, or more companies are coming into this space. Grain Management is talking about leasing its spectrum for D2D operations. But you're right. I mean, you talked about, is there too much investment going into satellites right now? Is there enough interest in satellites in order to maintain this level of investment? I think that certainly remains to be seen. Grain Management is one of the many companies that's coming into this space, hoping to take advantage of all the interest that's going on right now in there. They didn't say that anyone had leased their spectrum yet. They just said it's essentially available for lease. They're asking the FCC to make sure that they can lease that spectrum out for a D2D application, is essentially where they are now. They have not yet completed the purchase from T-Mobile. So presumably when they do, if they are able to close their purchase of that spectrum from T-Mobile and also receive an FCC waiver for D2D operations in that spectrum band, then they could go about leasing that spectrum to companies like potentially AST Space Mobile, Starlink, Link Global. We don't know yet. But this is sort of the market jostling that goes along with a market that is unclear how big it's going to be. Is there still opportunity here? It's really at its early stages of developing. And so I think it's interesting. I think it's it's something worth watching. It's just an indication that yes, there's still excitement going on right here in the D2D market and the wider satellite industry. It's a space. It's a sector of the market that is really fun to watch right now, because there's practically anything can happen, and anything can happen any week. And we don't know if maybe Amazon will buy Globalstar next week. That was the rumor that came up about a week ago. We'll see. I think a lot of this stuff is just rumor and speculation, but I mean, we'll see. There could be something big that happens relatively soon. We don't know.
I was going to say this is an extension. So Grain is getting this 800 megahertz spectrum from T-Mobile, which was originally supposed to sell it to Dish, but Dish didn't have the money to buy it, and they had first refusal.
Yeah.
But what's funny is what's not talked about is in Grain getting this 800 megahertz spectrum, and also paying some cash to T-Mobile. T-Mobile's also getting all of Grain's 600 megahertz licenses. So T-Mobile will strengthen its lowest band and coverage with more frequency, which they obviously need in the 600 megahertz band. So T-Mobile wins, Grain gets their money, and SpaceX gets more spectrum, which they are massively starved for, because they're going to be powering all of United's fleet, and we found out that Delta is going with Amazon Leo. So I think there's gonna be way more airlines using Starlink or some other Leo service. So there's gonna be lots of demand for that. Plus, on top of all the other things that are happening, like I wanted a cruise late last year. It was Starlink powered. They had like 6 or 7 Starlink terminals on the ship, and it was the best internet connection I've had on a cruise ever. Obviously, there's tons of room for improvement, but yeah, I got to be honest with you. I don't want to drag this out any longer, but I just don't think D2D as a market is as big as people seem to be acting like it is. I think if there is a market for it, it's in the commercial space, and like for commercial logistics and offering, because like I think Amazon's approach is a lot more like what I think where the market is going, which is servicing businesses, because I
Mhm.
think consumers are would love to have satellite, and I think it's a great service to have, but I don't think it's the majority of the population. I think it's great for airlines, but like as a user, I don't want to pay for that additionally because I'm not going to need it 99% of the time. Now, you're going rock climbing. I am sure you do not have service where you're rock climbing. Um,
I do appreciate it for that situation. Yeah, in case of
right. So I
accident.
think so I think like there are people who absolutely see the value and like their lifestyle matches the need. But like let's be honest, that's probably 10% of the population.
Right.
So
And it might be like 1% of my month, for example, that I'll need it. Yeah.
exactly. So like I think I like the idea of having the service and it being available. I think it's going to be huge for emergency services and other places where people need to have coverage where there just isn't any. But I just don't think it's going to replace the way people are behaving is like it's going to replace smartphones and terrestrial services. And I'm like, no, it's complementary, but it's necessary. I think to your point, it will be part of the 6G standard, but I just don't think like I think it's like a component carrier. It's not an anchor. So I think that's important to understand. And it's expensive to send satellites up. Like it's really expensive and to maintain them and to keep them fed with data. And that's why, Starlink is so successful because they have that critical mass, right? You know, when you buy a Starlink terminal, there's a 99% chance you're going to have coverage, right? Like it's very high. So that's why I think, it's going to be a challenge for smaller services to keep up. And I think we're going to see some consolidation. Somebody might end up buying Global Star. It could also end up being Apple. They already own a big chunk of it, so it wouldn't be a big lift for them. Um, but yeah, like we'll see what happens. I don't think we're anywhere near knowing what the end state will be, and most likely won't know until 2030.
Right. Right. Yeah. This is going to be a pretty fun ride, I think, for the next few years while everybody figures out the opportunity here and how, how much revenue there really is going to be in there. But yeah, for the next few years, it's going to be, practically anything goes. And
Yeah.
yeah, we'll be interested to watch it.
Well, yeah, I think that kind of wraps up our conversation for this week. I thanks again, Mike, for joining me. I also want to say thanks to our viewers and listeners for following along with us for this week's topics. And if anyone has any topics for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. I'm at Anshul Sog and Mike is at Mike D Dano. We both can be found on Twitter and on LinkedIn. And please don't forget to rate us and subscribe. And we hope you have a great rest of your week.